Welcome back to the Digital Accessibility Podcast. If you're looking to learn more about the field of accessibility, how to implement it within your role or company, or to get advice on where to start or see how others have navigated complex issues that you may find along the way, then you're in the right place. I'm honoured to be able to share these insightful chats with thought leaders, advocates and practitioners of digital accessibility throughout this podcast. As always, thank you for listening and I hope you enjoy the chat. Today, I'm absolutely thrilled to be joined by Professor Jonathan Hassell, a leader in digital accessibility space and founder of Hassell Inclusion. Jonathan's had a rich career that spans working as an editor for the BBC for the standards and guidelines, heading up their usability and accessibility, all the way to creating the BS 8878 standard, now known as the ISO 30071 and 1. Working as a visiting professor at London Metropolitan University and continuously influencing countless organisations to make their digital services more inclusive. Jonathan's a true pioneer in my eyes. So welcome to the podcast, Jonathan.
It's great to be with you, Joe. Sorry it took us so long to get this sorted, but glad to be with you.
I really appreciate your time. So yeah, thank you so much on my part as well. And I guess to start, the same with every other episode, we always love to hear about your personal journey into the realm of accessibility. So what first drew you into the field and how did that path sort of lead to you founding your own consultancy in Hassell Inclusion?
Yeah, so it's been like 25 years, so
Wow.
I will compress it. It all started for me around the turn of the century. Two things happened at the same time. I was recruited into the BBC to be that editor of standards and guidelines that you mentioned there, voted the least sexy job title in the BBC at the time. And at the same time, my nephew Carl was born. He's the reason I do what I do. He was born with spina bifida. I had a personal link to disability, and at the BBC, within the first few weeks, one of the things I was asked to do was to look to see if I could lead efforts at the BBC in getting good at how to make sure that all of the viewers who had been watching with captions and things like that, the history had a real sort of history of making sure that people with a disability were getting, if you like, good value for their license fee. My job was to try and extend that into the digital world that we were kind of spending, most of our time in what was then BBC Future Media, and then turned into kind of new media, or it was the other way around. Gosh, I don't know. It was a long time ago. It's the world we've been living in for a very long time now, and it was really my job to try and work out what good looked like, really. The BBC is a huge organization, also works with a large number of production companies. So the number of organizations who are creating digital stuff for us was huge. And it was my job to try and work out amongst all of the different teams, what were we doing that was good? What did it look like? How did we kind of capture it, codify it, share it so that other teams in the BBC were able to do the same thing? And one aspect of that was accessibility. So that's how I got started.
Wow. Oh, wow.
And it was loads of fun. I mean, the BBC, I haven't been there for years, but certainly at the time it was, we were just coming out of the bubble bursting, if you remember back that far.
Yeah.
The internet bubble, all of those initial sort of companies that were created, and then something went wrong, and all of those companies ceased to be. And a lot of those people who had a huge vision for what the internet could bring the country, what the what websites could do. Found themselves at the BBC. It was an amazing place. People like Tom Loosemore, who started gov.uk. He was one of my colleagues there. Loads of people. In the initial bits in podcasting. We had a new media studio downstairs where people were doing stuff that wasn't broadcast TV, but also wasn't radio. It was kind of something a bit different. So it was the brave new world. And it was a great place. It was my job to try and make sure that everybody could come with us into that brave new world. If they, whatever it was, whether it was a disability or a lack of a fast internet connection, that if we were doing good things, people could go with us. So I did that for a while. And my first role in accessibility was a few years later on something called BBC Jam. It was still one of the most interesting things I've ever done in my life. It was 150 million pounds worth of public money to try and help kids learn by playing computer games on over the internet.
So we have you to blame then.
So yeah, for example, I'm doing another podcast tomorrow in the education space, and because we were so far ahead of the whole world, it was kind of like lots of kids didn't think they liked learning because they didn't like school. And it was our job to kind of say, if we can help you understand how physics could help you escape from a desert island if you were marooned on it, and that was the game that you were playing, and you were learning these physics skills to actually sort of like science the hell out of it, as it were, as what was said in The Martian. That came out after we were there first. So yeah, we were trying to help kids 5 to O level kind of really learn O level GCSE. You can tell how old I am. So it was, and I had the most amazing job. My job was to try and make games accessible. And that had not really been even considered very much. There was a few people on the planet who understood what I was talking about, and I had literally to get on planes to go and sort of like doorstop them at conferences in all sorts of places all over the world to try and work out how we took what a generation of teachers, so special education needs teachers, had been doing one-on-one with kids, and try and make that kind of like digitized and gamified for how we could how we could make all of this work. So we did some of the first signing avatars in the world. We got Benjamin Zephaniah to give us his entire output for the year, all focused on the ability of blind kids to be able to use his poetry to learn Braille. Wow. We did some amazing things, and then it all kind of had a bit of a political handbrake turn, and I then arrived back in other parts of the BBC, and I ran accessibility and usability on things like the iPlayer. So won huge amounts of awards for doing what was necessary to make sure that that product was able to work for everybody. It was the early days of video on demand. People had not done captions, audio description, those sorts of things. We were the first in those in the world. I had a big team. We were helping to do accessibility across all of the BBC. We had about 400 websites at one point, and about kind of like 3 or 4 different apps. I had a team of about 15 and sort of like loads of suppliers. And it was my job to try and work out how to get this stuff done in a strategic way. And that was what I did. That's what ended up me leaving the BBC. I wrote all of that stuff down in the British Standard BS 8878 that you kind of mentioned, and I kind of realised that my job was done, really. We were, the BBC were the best. We were winning absolutely every single award when it came to accessibility, which started off as a lovely thing and ended up being a bit of a problem because it was kind of like, if we're winning every year, then other people aren't coming with us. So that was the point where I started thinking, I need to broaden this out. It can't be that my success is that I've made the BBC accessible. My success needs to be beyond that. So that was the point where I started thinking, yeah, how do we do this beyond? And that, if you like, was the first nugget of Hassell Inclusion as an idea.
Amazing. And what an organization as well, because of the amount of difference between, like, within the BBC. It's not just the one, it's not just broadcasted channels. It's like you mentioned, and even into the education and game sides of things. And then I'm thinking back to my own, I'll say GCSEs, not O levels, but thinking back to that time when I was studying, and there was sort of the BBC bite-sized things, and that was
Yeah.
gamified. And I'm just thinking, oh, okay, brilliant. Like, there was all these sort of chunks of information and it's all, and that's just, accessible for everyone. Like you say, it's not just focusing on people with disabilities, but no, amazing insight into your sort
Yeah,
of
I mean,
journey through that.
it was an amazing place because it was probably the one place where you could see all of that. We had everything from the news, which was, okay, we would love this to be accessible, but it needs to happen right now. I mean, literally, so if you want to kind of like, if the captioning isn't fast enough to for us to get this out to everybody right now, it can't wait. So it was kind of
Yeah.
challenges like that to education, which was, it's not just enough to be understandable, it needs to be fully understandable in terms of enabling people to learn. This is not a website that gives you information. This is a website that helps you learn. That's a higher level, all the way through to, the early days of streaming, stuff that was really, really interesting. Like I remember some of our radio stations were some of the initial sort of pushbacks on WCAG. There was something in WCAG version 1 that I think a lot of us really mourn because it was right, and unfortunately they got it wrong. But there was something in there about plain English. Your website needed to be in plain English. And we had, like, I think it was called One Extra. It was the black sort of urban radio kind of station on the BBC. And if I understood it, it meant it wasn't like for its audience. Its
Right.
audience were people who weren't me. And for me to come along and say that needs to be in plain English rather than that needs to be in the language that is being used with that particular audience would have just been utterly facile. So we had to go back to WCAG to say, actually, it's a bit bigger than just like plain English. And because we also have the services in every language in the world at the
Yeah. Well, yeah.
BBC. So and unfortunately their reaction was to kind of bury it in AAA, and we're still trying to kind of bring it back ever since.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, these were the sorts of opportunities that were there. It was a great place to be. It probably still is, I'm sure.
Oh, amazing. I'm sure they're still doing very good work at the BBC, definitely. And it's great to hear what you managed to achieve in your time there as well. And I guess that would bring me on to the second question, which is about, well, you're now sort of doing that growth part and going out to people beyond the BBC and starting your own consultancy. And I mean, it could be seen as a very bold move, but I guess what inspired, we've probably heard a little bit of that in your story from the BBC, but
Sure.
what was the inspiration for starting Hassell Inclusion, and how's it sort of evolved to address those ever-changing needs? I guess you're even talking about things at the BBC those years ago that there were already so many different needs. But I
Yeah.
guess in today's world, how have you had to sort of change and evolve as your own consultancy?
Sure. So, I mean, number one, starting your own business is something that you should think like multiple times on before you do it. It's not necessarily the easiest thing. Certainly, as somebody who'd kind of like worked in public sector for 10 years, I wasn't necessarily kind of set up to understand how businesses work. So it was quite a learning curve. But for me, and this is just who I am as a person, and who we are as Hassell Inclusion. Our mission is really, really quite simple, which is to have the biggest impact that we can have for accessibility. And so that's for people with disabilities, on behalf of people who are aging, as well. Um, I was in a situation where I felt that the BBC had given me so many gifts over the years. I mean, it was amazing. I got to spend more money on user testing with people with disabilities than I've ever experienced in any other organisation that we've worked with since. Because we needed to get it right, and we did it the right way. And it wasn't about WCAG. It was about, does WCAG give us enough to actually give people the service they expect if they have a disability? And you can only really understand that if you talk to somebody with a disability. So I gained so much from it, but yeah, we just saw a lack of commitment, a lack of understanding, a lack of capability. In pretty much every organization out there that wasn't the BBC. A few of the banks were doing some good stuff, some of the retailers. I'd worked with them on my committee at BSI. So I could see that things were kind of happening in various places. And really, towards the end of my time at the BBC, when I was working on BS 8878 and trying to kind of put down a kind of blueprint for how organizations could do the sort of stuff that we'd done at the BBC to get good.
Mm.
It just became kind of obvious that the blueprint wasn't enough, that people needed expert help to make it happen. And if all of the people stayed in the organizations that they were working in, like the BBC or the banks or whatever, then who was helping the other organizations? And so, yeah, that was the thing. I wanted to stop winning awards. It became, towards the end of my time at the BBC, I was kind of like, I don't want to put us in for awards this year. This is how I have been able to get recognition for all of the great work of my team, more funding internally, because everyone's going, well, if you give stuff to the accessibility team, they do amazing things with it and they make the BBC look good. So
Yeah.
yeah, so that was one of the things that I did to try and make sure that we were always considered a key part of what the BBC did. But my ambition was to not win, the next Beamer and the rest of it, because if we were winning it, what on earth was happening out there in the rest of the world? So yeah, that was the whole point of kind of setting up Hassell Inclusion, was to say, we've got a British standard now. It's available. It's codified. It's a good blueprint for people to get there. I'd written a book about it. Because the standard itself you had to pay for, which was not something I agreed with, but that's the way the British Standards Institute kind of work. I would have,
Mm.
I didn't make a single penny off it. And I tried to kind of, if you like, undercut the price of the standard by working with
Right.
British Standards kind of press, so their books, to make it kind of cheaper and fundamentally more easy to understand what we've been doing. But yeah, organizations kind of needed experts to come in and help them start getting good at this in a kind of systemic way. And that was the kind of the genesis of Hassell Inclusion, which initially was just me. And then I kind of picked up people along the way, and we took that British standard to international. And if you want to know how to say it, because
Oh yeah.
I had to work on this with my marketing people. I must admit, so standards are never like sensible numbers. They're completely odd. The way we say it is 30071 part one. So it is
Okay.
supposed to be the first part of that standard. I don't know if they've done the rest of them, but we kind of figured that if we put 007 in the middle there, people would remember that bit maybe just a little bit more. You don't need to remember the number. All you really need to know is to understand, if you like, what it does and why it's helpful. That has been pretty much my sort of my masterwork, as it were. That's the spine of my career in accessibility, is to take it from something that was just a kind of like a technical thing to be something which is more of a managerial thing. So organizations can say, yeah, how much is it going to cost us? How much of this should we be doing? Where does it fit in the organization? Is it so all of these different things that I'm sure we can kind of talk through. That's the stuff that really kind of makes the impact. In reality, technical standards are useful, but the standards that really matter are the ones that actually get stuff kind of like embedded in organizations. So, I spent a huge amount of my family's money, if I'm honest, sort of like, on planes and things, getting that standard done. No one pays you to do this sort of stuff. We finally signed it off in Japan.
Oh wow.
This was, if you like, my family's investment in how to help the world get better at this. And the reason why it's so useful is because there are other ISO standards out there, like 9001. That's quality. 27001. That's information security. There are so many kind of standards with a one at the end, and so what that allows organizations to do is to kind of go, okay, we understand ISO. We understand that this is something that we should do as a company to prove that we are, you know, worth working with, really. If it's a digital agency or a big kind of company that does civil engineering or whatever, these are the things that allow us to kind of say we are good at this area, quality or infotech or whatever. I helped create the version of that for accessibility, and that gave it a certain legitimacy.
Mm.
For years and years, you know, um, you know, everybody in the accessibility community has been saying, we want it thought about like you would do kind of like privacy or security or any of those sorts of things. The work that we did to make that ISO standard there was doing exactly that, was effectively saying accessibility isn't a weird thing. It's
Yeah.
not an odd thing. Weirdly, the accessibility world doesn't seem to get that. So the accessibility world thinks that the important standards organization are the W3C, because they were the people who created WCAG. The rest of the world think the big standards organization is ISO. So that's for example, the international standard on usability is the definition of usability, the international standard on security and all the rest of them. So it was quite interesting in that it's always felt like, because of the web, um, uh, and because of great work that was done, creating WCAG version 1 and version 2, people expected the important standards to come out of W3C, when in reality, the place they should come to actually give accessibility that legitimacy as an important part of a digital thing that you do it actually had to come from ISO. I
Mm.
still don't think that a lot of the accessibility world kind of get that. They kind of go like, why would ISO do an accessibility standard? It's almost the other way around, if you like.
Okay, I mean, so that brings me into that next part, the next question, which is the sort of difference between that, and you've explained it beautifully there about the sort of like again the WCAG and the well web accessibility uh, guidelines and the difference between the ISO and I guess it's from my perspective and from people that I've spoken to, because a lot of we're a tech recruitment agency, so we're always looking at it from a technical angle. But I suppose it's the key fundamental separation or the difference is that the WCAG is purely sort of web focused and it's based upon what can and can't be sort of implemented and using the PAW principles, so perceivable, operable. Is it understandable and
Understandable and
robust?
robust, yes.
Okay, test
Yeah,
passed.
you're good, you're good.
And then when it comes to the ISO, like you say, it's giving it legitimacy across the board. It's an internationally recognized sort of way to implement rather than sort of um, pointing out key elements maybe of or features of a site that need to be adjusted slightly maybe is I mean I don't know if that's
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the way I would normally describe it is it's a solution to a different problem. And from my perspective, it's a much more important problem.
mm,
So if WCAG helps you make a website accessible, ISO helps you make an organization
mm,
accessible and the process that organization uses to create digital products or procure them accessible. So WCAG is really, really good, especially if you're doing a website. But the people who want to use WCAG are people who are developers, designers, content authors, and testers. Of digital products is the term that we normally use. Um, the ISO standard is the standard for the business analysts, the product managers, the project managers, the test managers of those things. There are loads of different ways of testing the accessibility of a website. Most of them are a complete waste of your money, if I'm honest, because people just don't understand the opportunities, the variety of ways of doing things out there, and they don't understand the strategy that
mm,
says, look, how do I get accessibility into my product development the way I would something else like, security or the rest? And part of that is, yes, it's nice to have a checklist of technical things that you've got right. But that doesn't tell you, of the, at least kind of like 10 or 12 ways of testing whether you've got things right. Which of those test sort of possibilities are right for your organization and the product you're creating? It doesn't tell you the really important stuff from my perspective, like if you've got a product manager who wants the product to be accessible and they've got a team of people who are going to be creating it, what should they ask those people to understand whether or not they know how to do this?
mm,
Or even if they do know how to do this, what is it going to mean for the length of time that it's going to take, and so therefore the resources? If you look in the kind of like the real world, um, if you ever look at kind of like a digital project being reported in a newspaper,
mm,
it is always the newspaper saying this particular sort of, it's normally a government type thing, is 3 years sort of like late, and it has cost 5 times as much as they said in the first time. Yeah,
mm,
that's the reality of product development. Um, so in there, what does WCAG tell you about how much more expensive that product is gonna be to make it accessible? It could be that the reason it's late is because someone came along and went, yeah, accessibility. It
mm,
can't go live until it's WCAG compliant. How much is that actually going to cost that project?
yeah,
WCAG won't tell you a single thing about it. How good are those people in your team at accessibility? It won't tell you a single thing about that, you know.
Right.
So the whole idea of the ISO standard is to actually kind of put you in the place where you can say, look, there are really, really stupid ways of doing accessibility, you know, overlays being the most obvious one, you know, don't do it
Dirty
at
word,
all.
that one.
Yeah,
Dirty
well,
word.
exactly. But, you know, but an overlay is potentially something that you should consider as one of the options for accessibility. You know,
Mm,
people in the accessibility world hate them.
mm.
People outside the accessibility world who are being threatened with some sort of legal thing and just need to get accessibility the box ticked,
Yeah.
um, they kind of sound like a really great idea to them. You know, well, hold on a second. I don't need to be good at this at all. We've already got our product. It is absolutely awful. It doesn't matter how bad it is. If I put this line of JavaScript on it and give some money to these people, all of my problems go away. Who wouldn't want to buy that?
Yeah. Love a bit of snake oil.
Absolutely. Yeah. The problem is it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
But you have to kind of look at what we're doing in accessibility and to say, well, is that working?
Mm.
You know, is spending all of your money testing your product for accessibility before you put it live and finding out that the team who created this thing have no idea about accessibility, and you probably should have asked them at the
Mm.
start of the project rather than gone, oh, it'll be fine, we'll just test it at the end. You know, none of these things are good product management principles. And so a lot of what the ISO is about is to say, let's take all of that stuff that actually makes accessibility practical, that makes it affordable, that makes it achievable, and does all of that stuff in an ongoing way, because most products do not just, you don't create it, you do versions every, you know, couple of weeks or a couple of months or whatever. Um, and then how do you do that for different types of product?
Mm.
You know, some products are for customers. Some products are for your internal teams. Do people know in the accessibility community what the difference between those two different audiences should do to how you actually set up you know, a project to deliver accessibility in a kind of sensible way? These were the sort of questions that we were talking about when we were putting together the international standards, and that's the thing. That's why I'm so kind of passionate about it, because it actually makes accessibility possible.
Yeah.
Because if you do it the way that most organizations have done in the past, at least in a very piecemeal way, it is not achievable.
Mm.
You know, and the answer is not overlays. The answer is to actually think about this in a sensible way that you would think about if you were actually looking at security or privacy or all the rest of them. That's
Yeah.
why it has to be an ISO standard, because that is the thing that enables organizations to say, oh yeah, there is actually a process that we need to put in place here, you know, to make
It's
this happen.
really, really interesting, and it's something. I mean, like I say, I've always been more. I was speaking to people about the WCAG all the time, so it's like it's great to actually hear it from you. You know, one of the authors of the ISO standard, to say this is what it's for, and from that, in all that keeps going around in my head is that WCAG's great, but it's maybe a bit too late, or it's just it's used too late, or it's not thought about, and it's not really the and where their guidelines. This is where a lot of the struggles happen in that technical world is uh, it's hard to get buy-in because people are sort of just like, yeah, but it's just a guideline. Like, I don't actually
Mm.
have to do this sort of thing. But three words that you mentioned as well. So obviously there's the level AAA or
Mhm.
AAA standard for WCAG, but you mentioned affordable, achievable, and actionable. So maybe
Yeah.
you've got your own three A's for the ISO as well.
Well, yeah, oh gosh, I mean, we've gone through, you know, to try and communicate why accessibility is actually worth doing. You know, we've gone through all sorts of things. I've got the five E's. That was the first version of my book. We then kind of move things on a little from there. But the key thing really is that um, it's so important. You know, there is nothing wrong with WCAG other than It's not the only set of accessibility standards. It is right for some people. Those people happen to be developers, designers, and content authors, and people who do testing. It's not enough for them. It's woefully inadequate, for example, when it comes to the needs of people who are neurodivergent. Um, um, but you have to look at it and say it's for those people. But for those people to actually be given the time to focus on accessibility in their jobs, some other people who are kind of more important in an organization need to get bought in. And if you tell them about WCAG, it is not going to be, it's like, yeah, I'm going to tell people, I'm going to tell the CEO of our organization about Way Aria. It's like, who the hell cares? What he cares about is, so this accessibility thing, is this good news or bad news for my business's bottom line this year? And if I do this thing, who's going to benefit out there? Can we make a good PR story of that? Does it mean that we get rid of some sort of like legal or regulatory risk? Yeah, that's great. It's just about a website, right? Yeah, we don't do websites, in our company. So, I remember our phone started ringing off the hook a few years ago because the government asked, so through the Crown Commercial Services, who do the what they call the well, if you want to work for the government for the next 5 years, there is you have to kind of like prove that you're a marketing company who have the right skills and the right values in place and the right processes in place so that you can deliver what the government needs all the way through. And you're not having to ask, are you doing that? Are you doing that? Are you doing that? This is a good company. Yes, we're going to work with them as a government. And the Crown Commercial Services said, okay, all of these, you don't get to be a marketing company if you don't do ISO 30071 Part 1. If you're not compliant with that, we're not touching you. I don't know where they found it from. They didn't chat with us at all about it before they asked. I was really, really glad that they asked, but I would have wanted a conversation to have kind of maybe reset their expectations, because what they were doing were effectively going to loads of marketing companies that don't do websites. And they were jumping through from those organizations going, oh, well, accessibility doesn't apply to us. We just do video. We just do social media. We just do PDFs or whatever. And they were saying, yeah, all of that stuff needs to be accessible. Here is ISO 30071 Part 1. Go for it. And these organizations were terrified because they didn't do web. So therefore, WCAG wasn't something that they were at all knowledgeable about at all. And they needed to go from 0 to 100 within a couple of like months. Now, that wasn't possible. None of those organizations could do that. But what the government was asking for was a really sensible thing. The problem was that they didn't know how difficult that was. And those marketing organizations were like, help, who can help us with this thing? You wrote it, Jonathan. What do we do? So so a lot of what we've been doing over time is to try and help organizations with those sort of circumstances where they've got somebody requiring them to do this accessibility thing. So how would they do that in an efficient way? But also, if they manage that, if they do it, what are they going to get out of it? In that case, they're going to get being able to work with the government. But if I'm a bank and I get good at accessibility, how do I win? We all know how to avoid losing. If you don't do WCAG, you'll get, on, and you're in various different parts of Europe on the 28th of June this year. 25 countries have got people who will be coming after you if you're in banking or travel or ebooks or streaming or you're doing stuff with an e-shop. So organizations are going, oh, golly, okay, we've got to do this thing because it's a risk. If we don't do it, somebody's going to hit us with a financial stick, so they're going to fine us. If you're in Ireland, allegedly, they might actually put somebody on your board in prison for a year and a half. I really hope they don't do that. I think that would be slightly counterproductive. But the key thing here is this: if these are the reasons why organizations kind of like start getting into accessibility, they need to understand that there is an upside. It's really quite interesting in that if you think about accessibility in comparison to those other sort of ISO standards, things like security. I don't think security buys you more customers.
Well,
I think a lack of security makes your customers all go somewhere else. But actually, if I go from a bank that is insecure to a bank that is massively secure, I don't think that is a win for our bank in terms of the bottom line. That costs loads of money, and we will continue to be able to be a bank, and we won't have a run on our, on the money that is in there. But I don't necessarily think it actually kind of like wins us more customers. This is what we have in accessibility. If 20% of the population who have a disability can't use your product and you sell stuff, they can't buy from you. If you sort that out, they now can. The 20% of the population who are older actually have all of the money. The baby boomers, they're the people who've got the dosh swilling around. We did the research. And if they can't buy from your website, they'll just kind of like go to somewhere else that they can. So if you get this stuff right, you win.
And it's, I mean,
that's what we've got. We've got, accessibility is complicated. Accessibility, requires people to do some work. But fundamentally, if you get it right, you get return on investment. This is what we deliver to our clients all of the time. It's not enough for us to make them accessible. We're there to make them successful businesses. Because accessibility is part of the route to actually being a successful business, defined by however they consider it. Shareholder value, whether it's minimizing the costs of customer service, any of these sorts of things, accessibility actually makes you win. That's what we're here to try and do. But WCAG doesn't really kind of, tell you. That's for the people who make the stuff happen. You actually need the people at the top to understand why this stuff is worth happening, how to do it in an effective way so that it becomes part of what you do. And the best organizations are the ones that have actually got this. A lot of them work with us. Some of them don't. But a lot of the big organizations, they're not doing accessibility because, they want to be nice. They're doing accessibility because this is what actually powers their businesses alongside all sorts of other things. We're not asking for charity for people with disabilities here. We're saying that people with disabilities, are their customer base as well as everyone else. And so they are literally wasting money if they don't understand accessibility.
It's huge. I mean, it's the reputational risk, the legitimacy of a company, the market share. I mean, it's all of those things, all those terms that, like you said, I think there is a real problem, I think, in the accessibility space where it seems as if it's something that should be a charitable cause. But when you put it in the way that you've mentioned, there's so much potential for real return on investment and for it to actually be a benefit to the companies as well as everyone that should already have access to these services as well. So let's not get away from that point, that it should already be done. Things should be, but the reality is they're not. So it's yeah, it's great that you've got this in place
Yeah,
to help push that way.
and the reason why this particular conversation is so important to be having in February 2025 is that, there are four different categories of reason of businesses of benefits for accessibility. One is legal, one is ethical. I'll come back to that in a second. One is financial, and the other one is kind of innovation. Okay, so the ethical one, that is at debate at the moment. All of those organizations out there, like Meta and lots of other ones,
Yeah.
prompted by stuff happening in the States. Let's try and keep the politics out of it. But, they're effectively saying we cannot afford diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Hmm.
I would argue that when it comes to at least the group of people who have a disability, we cannot afford not to do this. Companies who are selling to those people cannot afford to not do accessibility, inclusive design, call it what you want, because they're not going to be able to. They are literally saying to kind of 20%, 40% of their potential customer base, we don't want to sell to you. That's just stupid in 2025. But also, just getting a touch political for a second, one of the key aims of our current government here in the UK is to get a lot of people who aren't in work back into work. A lot of people who aren't in work have disabilities. And if you to get, let's say, for example, you wave a magic wand and everybody suddenly has the skills to be able to do the right jobs that are there that actually probably aren't there in industry anyway. But if we just create the jobs, pop people into them, they're going to need to use digital tools to be able to do those jobs. So if those tools aren't actually accessible, if they don't work for them as people who have a disability, then it's the lack of tools that will stop people from being able to be in jobs. So they will not, be able to do the job. And so therefore they will just need to, go back to being on benefits.
Yeah.
Can you see from that perspective, as a country, we cannot afford financially for accessibility to not be something which is a fundamental part of every single digital tool that we use every single day at the work, irrespective of the key point that I think we both want to make, which is how dare we as a society lock people with disabilities out of employment? Employment gives you loads of other things, not just a pay packet.
Yeah.
And the amount of if growth is the thing that we're trying to get at the moment, you get growth from people who are actually doing something they're passionate about, are able to do, so it's just, we cannot afford as a country to be getting these sorts of things wrong. And so it's just bizarre at the moment that organizations are kind of going, oh, should we not do so much accessibility because DEI is kind of like wrong or something. And it's kind of like, yeah, if you do that, we are going backwards, not just as a planet that we would want to kind of be citizens of from an ethical perspective, but we are literally saying our gross domestic product of every country is going to go down because we are locking loads of people who could be incredibly valuable to society out of being able to be part of society. That's just stupid. So
Absolutely.
yeah, that's one of those things that we're kind of trying to get across at the moment because there is a lot of stupid going around, it feels, at the moment. And so, it's really, really important that, accessibility isn't just a nice thing you do. It's actually something that has the potential to help everybody, not just people with a disability, not just people who are older, absolutely everybody on the entire planet needs us to be really good at accessibility and not to be kind of wasting time, effort, or money getting things kind of done in inefficient ways. That's why we do what we do at Hassell Inclusion List.
Amazing. No, I really appreciate that. And I've just realized as you were going through that, I was like, oh, I've actually missed a question on here. So I'm not going to, because I don't want to take too much more of your time up, Jonathan. I know you're extremely
Well,
busy,
no,
man.
no, but actually, that question that we missed, let's just take a little bit of time on it because there is stuff in there as to, so if I've just said why accessibility is so important,
Yeah.
it then becomes really important for people who are interested in accessibility to know how they can be effective. And
Yeah.
that's what that question is all about. So go for it.
Definitely. I mean, so well, I mean, naturally, as a recruiter in the space, so very familiar with finding and hiring skilled accessibility specialists, but it is a very small pool of people, as you've alluded to as well. But what do you think are the key qualities that we do need to be looking for when recruiting people in this space? But also, there's always the question of certification as well. And could you let us know if there's anything in terms of ISO that is certification, and what Hassell's doing to support that as well?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, probably the first thing is that this used to be a very even smaller pool. When
Yeah.
I was when I was at the BBC doing this in kind of like, 2001, 2002, I pretty much knew everybody here in the UK and the US who was working in accessibility, and so it is awesome where we've got to. And just so we get it, so I don't know if you would agree with this, but so I've been tracking the number of people who have the word accessibility in their job title on
Mhm.
LinkedIn for my trends webinars over the past at least 6 years. We were pretty much the only part of the digital industry last year that got bigger.
Wow.
There was 11,000 people with accessibility in their job title in January 2024. It was 13,000 globally in 2025 last month.
Last month.
So this is a growth area. Um, and I can see that every single day of the week. Digital is going through a really hard time at the moment.
Yeah.
Most digital agencies, there are so many of them out there. None of them are look that different from the other ones. They're all trying to differentiate themselves from each other. They're all having a really, really hard time, and that's really sort of problematic for the digital industry as a whole. If you like, we've got too many people doing the wrong sort of things and too many
Mm.
agencies, and it's troubling. For an agency to actually kind of differentiate themselves, accessibility is a really good way of doing it.
Yeah.
And actually, to the point where we've had quite a number of digital agencies who've maybe got like one person on staff who knows something about accessibility. They're now kind of like setting themselves up as kind of like, yeah, we can do your audits and all of the rest of it. So we're not a digital agency, we're an accessibility company. It's kind of like, no, really, you're just a digital agency with one person who's been doing accessibility for like the last year.
Mm.
So there is some really kind of interesting things kind of happening in terms of everybody is trying to kind of jump into the accessibility thing, mostly because of the AI.
Yeah.
Um, my perspective is this: that's okay, but if you really want to have an impact and you have thought that to be an accessibility person, you have to be, you have to know all about HTML and CSS and JavaScript and ARIA and all the rest of it, because that's where the accessibility jobs are. There are a lot fewer jobs in that sort of space than there used to be. If you thought that accessibility was all about audits, here's the kind of like the news flash, AI is coming along to steal your lunch. In 2025, if you are a sensible person looking for a job, you should be thinking, yeah, where should I be kind of spending my time? And if you are thinking, aha, yeah, I can do accessibility audits, that's the sort of thing that we already have automated tools that are getting better and better and better. And hopefully at some point, maybe you won't need to be doing accessibility audits. Certainly not this year. We're still up to about kind of like 30% of WCAG that can be done by an automated tool. But hopefully AI will improve that. What it can't do is to understand people who have a disability. you know. So those are the sorts of skills you really want in 2025 if you are looking to be in accessibility, is actually kind of empathy, having spent time around people with disabilities, so you can actually understand why this stuff in WCAG is there. What I'm seeing out there at the moment is lots of people who like throwing kind of like baseball bats around and using WCAG as the baseball bat to hit companies with, to say, you crap here, you crap here, you crap here, you crap here. They don't know the impact of that stuff on people with disabilities. They don't know which of the bits in WCAG that really matter and the stuff that actually really matters that isn't in WCAG. When it comes to people with disabilities, they're literally just hot off their kind of like from university going, I've learned some stuff on WCAG. I'm going to kind of use this as a mechanism to hit people with. And I wish they'd stop, if I'm honest, because it's not helpful. It's useful for people to be able to have an audit done, but audits are done by people who actually understand what this stuff really means in terms of the impact on people with disabilities. But I think from our point of view, if you really, really want to be effective in accessibility, you have to be thinking about, well, probably the first thing is actually respect for designers, developers, and content authors. So a lot of people kind of do accessibility audits and go, you've got this wrong here, you've got this wrong here, your colors are wrong, and all of that. They know nothing about color theory. They have no idea that the color red is actually really great for branding. It brings people to it. It's great for calls to action. They might know that actually a lot of people who are autistic don't like the color red. So therefore we should just ban the color red. That's the sort of thing that happens out there. So the first thing is, nobody wants your accessibility advice in a product team if you don't understand what the product team does and respect it. That's the first thing. You need to actually respect your colleagues around you and not be using the kind of accessibility baseball bat in the wrong way. You need to, if you like, to be a good consultant. You need to be a good kind of collaborator. And then ideally, what you would want to do is to actually start going more strategic and to say, actually, the reason why most of those developers and content authors and people aren't doing accessibility isn't because they don't care, isn't because there's no training materials out there for them to do it. It's because their boss doesn't think that it's worth doing. So if you really want to be sort of effective when it comes to accessibility, you're speaking to the wrong people.
Wow.
Yeah, you need to be speaking to people at the top. So a lot of what we do, this is where we spend all of our time. It's why everybody comes to us and says, gosh, you're not like the other companies. You do accessibility in a completely different way. We do accessibility based on, you might want to kind of like, but it's sales and not like us selling to clients. Accessibility is all about selling. You need to sell yourself as an expert to the team so that they go, well, okay, yes, this audit that was done, you're telling us we've got all of these things wrong. Are you sure? Because this is going to be a hell of a lot of work to do if you're not. When did you start doing this auditing thing? So a lot of the people who are setting themselves up to do audits who don't really know what they're doing are actually causing a lot of trouble because they do the audit, they get paid for it, not very much because they're not very good, but the people don't actually fix things.
Right. Yeah.
So it's really important to have credibility and to actually be able to talk to people like you understand what they're doing. The amount of times I read audit reports that say your color contrast is wrong. Don't worry, you can fix it by going from this hex value of your color to this hex value.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, go and take that to the brand part of that organization and see if they buy that. and see if they don't just kick you out of the building as somebody who's totally naive about what branding is and how it matters. So you have to kind of understand the world you're living in. Everybody at Hassell Inclusion, is loved by our clients because we understand what they do. So when we say, look, I'm sorry, you had a real problem over here, we're able to tell them how long it's going to take them to fix that. And we also know that they are probably going to be massively stressed because they were supposed to be spending that time on something else. And so somebody is making the decision to say, we're doing this rather than that. And potentially that might cost them their job if they get it wrong. So you have to be a helpful kind of person. I think the other thing is that if you really want to get stuff sorted out, you have to understand, if you like, how to sell things to various different levels of the business. Because if somebody comes back to you and says, yeah, I'd love to fix all of that stuff in that audit you did for us, but actually we've got no time, what they're basically saying is, somebody needs to get me time for this to happen.
Yeah.
And it's not me. I don't know how to do that as a little developer or whatever. So can you, the accessibility person, go and get me the time to do the thing? Otherwise, all of that money that we spent on that audit report is kind of pointless, really.
Just wasted. Yeah.
So this is the sort of stuff. So, I've been training, I haven't done it for a few years, but one of the things, we work with lots of different universities, City University on their MSc program for inclusive design. I'm the guy who kind of comes in and says, look, you could learn about how to do your testing and things, or you could learn about politics in organizations, how to get money, how to get buy-in, how to get time, how to understand politics, how to understand accountability, how to bring together consortiums of people within an organization to actually kind of get this stuff right. If you don't know what your organization does to make money, literally to, make money on the bottom line to pay people, you won't be able to do accessibility because you won't know how to link between the thing that you want to happen and the thing the business needs to happen. How to access funding, how to provide good news stories back to people who have actually given you the time and money to actually make accessibility happen. If you don't go back to them to say, because of you employing me in my job, these good things have happened, you will probably not have a job next year because they'll go, yeah, but why are we doing accessibility in the first place? So everybody needs to be a kind of salesperson for what they do. So from my perspective, the people in accessibility that really matter, that have the biggest impact, are, for want of a better word, the managers. They're the people who actually kind of get money budget within the organization to enable accessibility to happen. The people doing the technical stuff are completely beholden to them. If those people who are actually delivering the environment where accessibility can happen don't do their jobs, then the technical people will just not be recruited. If they are, they won't have the time to do it. The number of people that we speak to in organizations that say, oh yeah, I do accessibility off the side of my desk, it's not my job. And that is the problem, for if we're in this to actually have the right impact on the world, we have to be thinking about how to get the investment into accessibility in all of the companies. That buy-in is the most important thing, and it needs to be continuous. So therefore, you need to, keep on reporting back to the person who gave you that money. This is the great things we've done from it. To come back to that stuff about awards. That's why I did all of that at the BBC. It was my job to make sure that accessibility was considered a sensible thing for the BBC to do, and something for it to do more of, that was really important for the organisation, and that we were doing a great job, so therefore we could be trusted with more money to do more. That from our perspective is always the key thing. But to answer your question about sort of certifications and things like that, so I was there in the room when the IAAP was created at CSUN in San Diego about sort of like, 15 so years ago now. I love it as an organization trying to do good things. I do think their certifications are better than nothing, but I do think that they have missed what is actually important. Because for me, what's important is just what I've been talking about, and really when it comes down to it, I have met so many people who've got IAAP certifications who don't know how businesses work, so that they're not able to be a good consultant or good colleague. But they still don't know enough about how to also get it done right in a product. There are lots of completely different things that you need to know if you're different roles. And the IAAP stuff, other than I quite like some of the things they do on the kind of document stuff, but certainly our training is way past that, because our training is trying to make sure that people have the skills to be able to deliver what is necessary in their role for the sorts of products that they're working on. That goes way beyond anything that the certifications out there do. We do certifications for people who've come on our audit course. We do train people in how to audit, because we've been doing it for best part of 20 years. Most of our trainers. And we also understand how that properly kind of fits in to an organization that doesn't want to be spending all of their money on audits. Why would you?
Well, yeah.
What we do is we provide certificates for people who've come on our training. We provide, if you like, stuff that properly matters on projects, because the key certificate you actually want is a product manager who gives you a reference that says, because person X, whoever the person is, was part of my team, we were able to deliver accessibility on this really complicated product. That beats everything on certificates, because that's the real world stuff, and that really matters. If you've got somebody who's delivered accessibility on a software as a service over 4 releases, and has actually taken things kind of up a notch every single time, they are worth their weight in gold. And a certification just proves that you're not, you understand some of the theory, but in practice, gosh, that's so far away from what you actually need to actually do it in practice. You need, people who are good at accessibility are people with scars. People with war wounds, people who've gone through the hell of, okay, what do we do now? Because that JavaScript library didn't work. That date picker that we were just using on the thing isn't as accessible as we like. And the reason we used it from the JavaScript library is that nobody around here understands JavaScript. And we've now got an audit that says there's a problem in the JavaScript in the library thing. And it's like, well, the hell do we do now? That's accessibility. That's proper good stuff. Accessibility is your product manager coming to you as a designer and saying, okay, that new brand that we created? We got a real problem. They didn't actually put somebody who knew accessibility in that team. So we're now trying to work with the brand colors that we need to work with in the organization, and we need to kind of work it out as we go along, because most combinations of them just aren't going to work for us. So what do we do? You know, that's the designer you want, is somebody who's been through that. You know, a tester, you want somebody who's been told that they need to kind of like take the time it takes them to do their accessibility testing and cut it in half, because on this particular project, that's the only way it's going to happen. That's the person you want. You know, your content person needs to be somebody who actually is going to properly understand how this stuff works with content management systems, and what to do if a content management system doesn't allow you to actually embed in your content the accessibility that WCAG requires. You know, go and talk to them about, you know, can they put in this phrase is in French, and see if they can work that out with their content management system. You know, these are the right exam questions. None of these are in you know, the IAAP stuff, because it's more about, do you understand WCAG? You know,
it's the practicality, I guess, though, isn't it, as well? It's just putting it into practice, like you say. And I think Craig Abbott has said in a previous episode, he hated saying it, but he said, I think if you work in accessibility, you need to be resilient. And it's horrible we have to force resilience and say that's what it takes, but it sounds very similar from your perspective, that you have to have suffered almost to be able to have overcome and try new things, and really understand the sort of ingrained nature that is needed to sort of progress in accessibility.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's but that's life, that's work, that's jobs. Yeah, I mean, you know, I mean, I totally agree with Craig, but you know, we all should be taking care of each other and ourselves in our jobs, because especially in 2025, you just pop to the other side of the pond at the moment and go and talk to a DEI person and tell them how they fit, you know, ask them how they're feeling. Some of the things that we are doing at the moment is to try and sort of create spaces. You know, our webinars every month are a space where people who love this stuff and are going through hell come together to at least have the best hour of their month when it comes to accessibility. You know, that's what we aim it to be. You know, there's kind of two tracks of it. You can listen to us to talk about something that hopefully might sort your problems out and sort of like take you to where accessibility is going next. Or you can chat with the other people in the chat, because we keep it open, to make you feel like you're part of a community. You know, we are under fire at the moment as a community. Here in the UK, we're a lot further away from the kind of heart of the fire, but it's still burning, and it's still kind of depriving us of a lot of the oxygen we need to be able to do our jobs. What we try and do is to help clients understand how we can help them with the challenges that they have. You know, accessibility is not always easy. It is the most interesting thing I've ever done in my life, and will probably ever do in my life, because it encompasses everything from sort of like, needing to be the most amazing salesperson to understand sort of like legal stuff from parts all over the world, to work with procurement people, to work with kind of people who are in kind of diversity and inclusion, who are looking at disability as one part of a larger whole of groups of people that they're trying to serve. Research, the number of people who have different jobs who come to us because they all have an accessibility challenge is the cool thing, and that's what we do. And so I'd really encourage people to keep on coming to your podcast, and because you've got people on here who've been doing this for a while. So if people want to kind of build up their career, that's a really good thing. We've got the Digital Accessibility Experts podcast, which is ours, which is basically our webinars a couple of months later, just the audio. Come to our webinars and you can be part of a community. You can find all of this stuff on hasselinclusion.com. A lot of the things that we are trying to do, is to build an industry that has the impact that we all want to have. And it's that's the thing that kind of really, really kind of matters, is the impact we're all having at the end. What we don't want is just lots of people who are really keen on accessibility who burn out. That's not an industry, anyone wants to work in.
Exactly, and it's not sustainable. But I mean, I've had so much of your time, Jonathan. So I'm just going to take us to final thoughts. I mean, we will probably invite you back again if you have the time for thoughts, maybe post EAA regulation. I know that we were hoping to spend a bit of time on that, but I know you're very busy. And so any final thoughts? Anything else? I mean, I love the webinars. I have been to quite a few of them, obviously time permitting, but it's great that you've got that as a podcast as well to revisit. So it's great for some advice and things. So I appreciate you putting that out there as well. But anything else you want to share with the listeners?
Yeah, I mean, just on the EAA point, we have, as I say, if you find me on LinkedIn, I've got a newsletter on there. We did a really good piece on the EAA, kind of like September last year. If you're working in an organization that doesn't know that the EAA is coming along, it's best not to kind of like stick your head in the sand, but to try and get some help. We're helping loads of organizations do that. And probably just the last thing really is that, just to go out on a really, really positive note, accessibility is the best fun I think you can have in digital. It requires a lot of you to kind of, to understand all of these different types of things, and for example, the EAA is now requiring us to be thinking about kiosks as well as websites and mobile apps. If you've got experience in this area, can you work out how to kind of transition it across to some of the new areas? The EAA also requires your customer service people, the people who kind of like, are on the phones, to be trained in how to handle situations where somebody with a disability calls them. And so it's always growing. We're doing stuff in, accessibility and AI, VR, AR, all of the new kind of technologies and things. It never gets old. It never gets boring. We're, I guess, in a sort of like luxurious situation in the sense that we generally tend to get the new things. People come to us with the stuff that's never been done before, and we try and share as much of that stuff on things like our webinars as we can. So for example, WCAG is not good at neurodivergence. We work with National Autistic Society to sort that out. We can provide that sort of stuff for you. Everywhere where the whole industry is going, we're always thinking 1, 2, 3, 4 years ahead. So if you're interested in, does this stuff have legs? Is a career and accessibility a good thing? What could it look like? We're too busy these days, unfortunately, to be able to answer sort of individual questions. But if you come to our webinars, we've got hundreds, of people on them. So people love our webinars totally. You'll get to see where everything is going, and be part of a community that I've always been a real kind of advocate for, and just enjoyed being part of. It's a good world, accessibility. It's not always easy, but I think we do care for each other.
Absolutely.
And I know that's the experience. It's one of the reasons why I wanted to be on your podcast, Joe, because I love what you're doing. Bringing some of the kind of names that are out there who are doing really great stuff in their companies, giving them just a few moments to kind of go, what's it all about really? And, what can I share that might help people? So I hope that I've been able to share a little bit on this podcast today. And as I say, if people come to our webinars, there's loads more where this comes from.
Amazing. Well, I've definitely learned a lot, so I hope that the listeners learn as well. And it's just so insightful, and really appreciate you being open about your background and your journey as well. So it's and just all of your time and everything you're doing in the space. So thank you so much, Jonathan. And I'm sure it's not the last time we'll speak. So yeah, just let me know if there's anything I can ever do to help as well. So yeah, we'll stay in touch. Thanks again.
Well, thanks, Joe. Thanks, everyone. Cheers. Take care.